By the time this video comes out, I am pretty sure it's going to be 2024, mostly because I know what videos are coming out in December because I schedule them. Because it's 2024 when you're watching this, I wanted to do a video kind of on the impacts or impressions that COVID-19, the pandemic, had on me as it relates to landlords. I will preface in this video that I live in California, specifically Los Angeles, that had some of the strongest and longest standing tenant protections and eviction moratoriums in the country. But there was 4 fundamental things that I took away from the COVID pandemic that I feel landlords should be aware of going forward, how much things have changed, and the kind of adjustments that they need to make. So to just dive right into it, the first takeaway I took from the pandemic was that you have to be nimble as a landlord. The government at the federal, state, and local level exercised a lot of emergency powers, and they essentially took away a lot of the rights and powers of landlords temporarily and in many ways permanently for this ongoing issue, which was a concern of people being evicted, being out on the street due to a lot of circumstances out of their control. And what later, became a solution wasn't a solution right away. Things like not paying rent. In California, ultimately, there's a rent relief program. In Los Angeles, there are rent relief programs. There are rent relief programs throughout the state. And there's also a state one, so local and state. But those came later. There were some mortgage relief programs. Again, those came later. And the mortgage relief programs were actually really hard to qualify for. And from what I saw, not many people qualified for them anyways. But you have to be nimble as a landlord in the sense that you have to expect things to change rapidly now, rules to be passed that maybe later get struck down. Like a lot of what I saw in Los Angeles, whether it was the city, the board of supervisors, or other localities, was a lot of do this first and we'll deal with challenges later. Some of the moratoriums were struck down. Some of the laws that they tried to later make permanent were struck down. But in the meantime, they were there in place and landlords couldn't do much about it. So one of the ways you can kind of be nimble is more so you just kind of have to cut back. And I know it's easy for me to say that, but for a lot of landlords, it became very obvious that you need to have reserves in the event that you have to maybe evict a tenant. Expect that that's going to take a hit on your cash flow because evictions are very complicated. But also being nimble in the sense, be educated. Get very informed on what's going on and, advocate. So if something is changing that you don't like, something's being proposed, you need to get out there and advocate for your rights, because there's a lot of tenant advocacy and there needs to be more landlord advocacy to balance that. I don't disagree with all tenant rights, but I definitely don't disagree with the abolishing of a lot of landlord rights. But yeah, there's a lot of, you're gonna have to look at risk mitigation completely differently. The next 3 things are kind of more actionable things. That's kind of more of like a mindset kind of thing. More actionable things that you can do is when you have a vacancy, that's your clean slate. So you have basically one shot when you get a new tenant in to get your ducks better in a row. So a lot of landlords might have been really relaxed on things, which was great. That was, great for a lot of tenants, but the more regulation that came down, the more landlords have to be strict. So we have a clean slate. Make sure that when you get a vacancy, you address deferred maintenance right there. Do a really thorough inspection of the unit and, address deferred maintenance. If there's things that need to be changed, change them. Check appliances, check wall heaters, make sure everything is working. ACs, whatever appliances that you have, check them and make sure that they work. Rehab a unit with the eye for kind of what's trending. So look at other vacancies on the market and see what those units are looking at, and as much as you can try to emulate that, within a budget, but look at the amenities they have compared to what you have and see if maybe you can implement changes or upgrades that might be more appealing for the trends of what tenants are looking for. It just will help you, at least be in the ballpark of market rent with all these other units. And get a really good lease in place. Look through your lease, look at other people's leases, purposes. Look at apartment associations. I have a lease that's for sale. Get a good lease in place. And definitely have an attorney look at it. If there's anything specific that you need, you want to make sure that it's in there. Apartment associations are great for that because they tend to have updated things for your locality. Review and update your leasing criteria. So go through it. If you had a long-standing vacancy and you haven't had to rent in a long time, there's a lot of laws that have changed. So you want to update your leasing criteria. You might want to, change how the credit score you look at. You might want to change the income requirements, things like that. Take really good move-in photos, not only for marketing purposes, but there are so many landlords that don't have like move-in photos. So when you go to deal with the security deposit, don't have a beginning condition of the unit. So as much as you can, take really good move-in photos so you can document that and save those photos. And the next thing is tenant vetting is going to get harder. So I've seen this trend with a lot of clients where they're having a lot of issues filling vacancies. They're having long-standing vacancies, and it's not because there's a shortage of inquiries, and there's not a shortage of potential applications. It's that people are not meeting their criteria. Credit's too low, their income is not verifiable or it's not there. They have not only a low credit score, but they might have dings on their credit and they might be recent and they might even be eviction related. Keep in mind with COVID, this is why this kind of goes back to, things I learned from COVID. A lot of tenants during COVID didn't pay rent and a lot of them got evicted and didn't respond to the evictions. Maybe some of them bailed on their unit and so landlords went to go collect the back rent and the tenants maybe didn't respond to those collection efforts, things like that. But a lot of the tenants that during COVID took advantage of the situation and didn't pay, they're now having, the trouble of finding places to move to because landlords are now getting really critical about vetting tenants. And, a main component of vetting a tenant is getting on the phone with their prior landlord and asking about their rental history. And if a tenant didn't pay their rent or skipped out or didn't, make any efforts to try to make a payment plan or a settlement agreement with their landlord, they're not going to have a lot of rental references. There's also been a slew of fake pay stubs. So you also want to verify income. Tenant vetting is getting harder in the sense that there's just not a pool of tenants in all areas that meet the leasing criteria that you have. And maybe that requires you reflecting on your criteria, or maybe just means you got to hold a vacancy longer until someone qualified comes up because people move all the time. Another thing is, for a lot of apartment buildings, Section 8 is super helpful, but things are changing with Section 8. There's fewer programs paying security deposits for tenants. Another tool that tenants had, which is if you didn't meet the credit criteria, you could, landlords could charge a double security deposit. That's being taken away from landlords starting in July of next year, or this year, if you're watching it this year, 2024. So, a lot of landlords would say, hey, you don't have the credit, but if you pay double security deposit, we'll take you. That's out the window. So a lot of landlords aren't even giving these people any chances because there's not a double security deposit. Section 8's taking forever to process applications. That might not be true for all places, but in Los Angeles, it's a major problem. They're months and months behind and they're completely short-staffed. Yes, just filling vacancies is getting harder. Is it going to be that way? No, but because of all the things that happened during COVID and just the sheer amount of non-payments of rent, which topped out at over $1 billion in California in unpaid rent. You're not the only landlord if you feel like it's really hard to fill vacancies. One, it's hard to fill them towards the end of the year because people just don't move towards the end of the year. But also it's just there's a criteria that you're as a landlord setting that's really hard for tenants to meet. And it might mean that that person's going to, the good fit is going to take a long time to find, but might be worth it because it doesn't help you to move someone in now who's just going to immediately default and be on an eviction list, and then you and that tenant are now steps behind in making progress. The last one is lease enforcement is now a top priority for landlords. Landlords that used to be pretty relaxed about things or turn a blind eye to a lot of things are just not tolerating it. And you kind of shouldn't. When I said earlier that you have a clean slate with the vacancy, once you put someone in and you're probably going to have a really hardcore lease, your job is to enforce it. A hardcore lease in favor of the landlord does nothing for a landlord if it's not being enforced. The longer you let something go on without enforcing the lease, the closer you are to waiving any of that enforcement. So what you want to do is, first, what sets the tone? If you have a lease and someone's immediately violating it and you call them out for it, it sets the tone of the tenant that that's not going to be acceptable. It will likely deter them from trying to break the lease early, and it'll likely deter them from trying to do other sorts of violations with the lease. But you need to enforce it right away. You need to do tenant write-ups that are thorough, do dates, times, what the violation is, what section of lease got violated, the evidence that you have of it, and put the tenant on notice. And it might very well be it was an oversight on the tenant's part, and they'll be very mindful next. Or it might be, that this tenant's not going to be a good fit. If you have things that require a perform or quit or some sort of eviction related notice, you want to get on top of that as soon as possible. You don't want to delay on it. So many landlords come to me and they go, oh, the tenant's been like this forever. They always are violating the lease. Well, you should have, the first time it happened, you should have enforced it. You don't keep letting these things happen for years on end. So if you have a new tenant, don't do that same mistake. You have to enforce the lease. That's why it's there. I don't love evictions. I don't do evictions. I don't like them. They're tedious, they're time consuming, they're expensive, they create so much animosity, but they're the only avenue that landlords have to get possession back. So if you need to get a unit back and you need to get someone out for violating lease, you have to go through the eviction court if you can't reach an agreement with the tenant to voluntarily move out, which that's a whole other topic. But a lot of the things that I surmised from COVID-19 was that landlords have to be extremely proactive in their property rights. Otherwise, the government will step in, as they have, and made it extremely difficult for landlords to get property back. So you want to have a really good lease that outlines a lot of your rights, and you want to enforce them, and you have to be patient. Like above all things, you have to be patient. You want good tenants, you're going to have to probably hold out for good tenants. You might have to do concessions in the sense that maybe you have to cut back on rent, the market rent, maybe you lower it, maybe you throw in parking. Well, technically you can't throw in parking anymore for certain apartment buildings starting next year. You want to collaborate and work with the tenant, but don't expect anyone to come help you. Like the tenant's not going to help you enforce your rights. The government's not going to do it. You're on your own, and your best bet is to document things as best as you can and really push for your rights. I think advocacy is really important. As much as tenants really think it's important to advocate for their rights, I think landlords need to do the same. And I strongly encourage landlords to sign up for, apartment associations in their area, because there's usually an advocacy division, and the apartment associations work really hard at working with legislators to make sure that the laws that get passed carry out what they're intended to do. If they're meant to give tenants rights, they give tenants rights equitably, not to the detriment of landlords. And so, that is my takeaways from COVID. It was a really terrible time for absolutely everybody, for landlords, for tenants, for business owners, for employees. It was just like a lot of uncertainty, and I'd never ever want to go through that again. And I hope we never have another pandemic. But it has put to the forefront housing is a major problem, and housing providers are carrying a lot of weight for society. And if you're going to be a housing provider, which to me is a noble endeavor, just expect that there's a lot of responsibility on you, and if you want to enforce your rights, it's your responsibility to do that. That is a huge takeaway. Patience, and you have more responsibility now than ever. If you like this video, which seems like maybe because it's just late when I'm filming it, I seem like a little drowsy, but if you liked it and you thought that was helpful, you also might want to watch my video on vetting lease applications. I will link that in the end screen. Other than that, thank you for checking this one out, and I will see you in the next one.